presentation, please use the chat feature and send them directly to our intern, Sabina, ICSW intern Sabina, in the chat. This presentation is being recorded, so I ask that you remember to please keep your mics muted throughout the presentation. Also, for some people, they prefer to utilize the speaker view while the presenter is speaking. If you like to use the speaker view, move your mouse to the right top portion of your screen, select the view icon, and then select speaker. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Joseph Palumbo. Joseph Palumbo is the Distinguished Director Emeritus of the Joseph Palumbo Center for Neuroscience and Psychoanalytic Social Work. He is also the founding dean and a faculty member of the Institute for Clinical Social Work, and he's a licensed clinical social worker. I would like to invite Joseph Palumbo forward now on the virtual floor to provide remarks for today's occasion. Joe?
Thank you, Michelle. I'm happy to make some comments to introduce our 40th anniversary lecture series. This is the second in that series. In my first introduction to our lecture series, I spoke with pride of the achievements attained by the founders of our institute. We realized the vision of an educational institution that offers a PhD in clinical social work. I made mention of the achievements of our graduates and the growth that occurred during the past 40 years. Today, I want to give credit to all those who made that vision into a reality. While I cannot name every individual whose contributions made our continued existence possible, they number in the hundreds, I want to credit various entities that guided our path over the years. First, I want to give credit to the members of the boards of trustees whose dedication over the years provided stability and financial oversight that permitted us to operate effectively. I also want to thank our generous donors who help sustain our programs with their gifts. Second, I want to recognize the succession of presidents who navigate us through the succession, through the troubled waters during those years, and were able to provide the leadership that made possible the realization of our mission. Next, I cannot give sufficient recognition and thanks to our devoted faculty for their enormous contributions. Despite the minimal compensations they received, they spent endless hours of their precious time teaching, guiding, and inspiring our students. The first group of students who enrolled in ICSW took a chance that our institute would survive and succeed and overcome the many obstacles that stood in its ways. Their wager paid off and opened the way to a succession of students who now number in the hundreds. As alumni, those students give testimony to the success of our educational model, and they are the best source for recruitment of new students. Finally, I want to express my appreciation for the work the administrative teams performed that kept the wheels turning and facilitated the implementation of the policies and procedures that are essential to the functioning of any institution. The joint efforts of all of these people who were involved deserve our gratitude for all that they have contributed to the existence and to the success of our institute. Thank you.
Joe, thank you for those wonderful remarks about our founding and the work that we've accomplished leading up to this 40th anniversary lecture series. Next, it is my pleasure to introduce to you one of our students, Francesca Cole Barnes. She will introduce our speaker. Francesca is a second-year PhD student here at the Institute for Clinical Social Work. She is a licensed clinical professional counselor, and she works in private practice. At her private practice, Francesca specializes in psychodynamic therapy, trauma-informed therapy, and child-parent psychotherapy. Francesca, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stewart. It is an honor and pleasure to be here with all of you and to introduce our speaker this morning, Dr. Gloria Mucino. Dr. Gloria is a PsyD and LCSW graduate from the Simmons School of Social Work in Boston, Massachusetts. She has over 30 years of clinical experience, including direct practice, supervision, and consultation. Dr. Gloria earned her PsyD from the Institute of Contemporary Psychoanalysis in LA, where she also has a private practice. There, Dr. Gloria sees adults, families, and adolescents. She works with young children from using an infant mental health perspective, and she also specializes in anxiety, depression, and processing disorders using a contemporary analytic relational model. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Gloria Mucino.
Thank you, Francesca. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I want to thank you for inviting me to be part of your lecture series. I'm very excited to be with all of you here today. Today, I want to go over my dissertation and discuss with you the dissertation that I submitted for my psychoanalytic degree in May. And I want to thank Joe Palumbo for being my mentor as he helped me and guided me through this process of writing this. Almost seemed like impossible at times to finish this dissertation for me, but here I am, and I'm so happy that Joe really provided that support for me. Let's see. Oh, I need to, oops, how do I get the, let me see, I need to get my, okay, I'll share my screen. Is everybody seeing my screen?
Not yet.
Okay.
It's starting. We got
it. Great. Okay. So what kind of name is Mucino? My experience, my dissertation is what kind of name is Mucino? My experience as a Latinx analyst navigating the slippery slope of intersubjectivity, race, and culture. So let's talk, we're gonna do, how come it's not, oh, wait a minute. I'm trying to move the slide here.
Oh. Can you use the arrow underneath?
Oh, I see.
Social work? Yeah, I think the other one.
Okay, but the learning objectives, excuse me, for today are, let's see, I just need to move this a little bit here. Just need to, okay. The learning objectives is to, excuse me, to understand the interplay between culture, race, and intersubjectivity in the clinical setting, developing awareness of why discomfort in the therapeutic relationship, and embracing culture differences as a strength instead of pathologizing them. Okay, now what I'm going to do today is talk part of my presentation is going to be a clinical case that I wrote as part of my dissertation. I begin describing the journey as an analyst in the issue of ethnicity, culture, and class. These issues were significantly discrepant between the patient and the analyst in the treatment process described in this paper. The patient, a 35-year-old white male, came in with marital issues and a depleted sense of self. There was no literature on the analytic dyad between a Latinx analyst and a white patient, and even scarcer research on the specific dyad of a Mexican-American analyst. Most research in the literature describes a discordant ethnic background as excuse me, an ethnic background as an impediment in treatment. However, in this case, it actually enhanced the treatment. Oh, the arrow, sorry. Okay. David is the patient and is the focus of this paper. Excuse me. I will focus on the interplay between ethnic culture and that emerged in our intersubjective relationship. I will begin with a personal biographical material to contextualize my contribution to the therapeutic process. Writing this paper has been transformational in helping me with my own identity, ethnicity, and culture, and racing up as I did in the world of white privilege. My journey. As I land in Boston for graduate school from Los Angeles, I soon realized that this pursuit of graduate study was going to be a challenge in more ways than I had ever experienced before. Not only was I going to be managing the academic stress and adjusting to a new city, but as I looked around in my class of 100, it was obvious that I was the only Latinx student present. The entire experience was exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. I experienced a culture shock at many levels and clearly was out of my element. Climbing up the stairs, climbing up the subway stairs on a long day after my internship, the subway driver asked, "You look different. Where are you from?" It seemed that I was not the only one who noticed how much I stood apart from the rest. It became immediately clear to me that I was the only Latinx, not only in my class, but in the entire graduate program. I found myself feeling anxious and self-doubt. I questioned why I was accepted to this program, and the imposter syndrome and a collection of feelings of inadequacy persist, despite evidence of success. Looking around, I found that I could not identify with anyone. I felt like I was in a different country, not a different state. I discovered that the city of Boston was divided by ethnic and racial lines: Italian, Irish, American, African American, and Puerto Rican. Because of my Spanish fluency, I was assigned to work with the Puerto Rican community. I soon discovered that the Caribbean Latinx culture and community was much different than the Mexican American and Chileno Latinx community I grew up with. I quickly appreciated the richness that the Puerto Rican community had to offer me. I had an African American classmate, also from Los Angeles, who left the program after a few months. Like me, she felt culturally different in the space and could not tolerate the culture disconnect. I was discouraged and disappointed by her leaving, and I wondered if I would be next. Her leaving was a loss for me, leading me to ask myself, why am I still here? Well, am I going to make the same decision and leave too? Excuse me. Was my light skin that helped me pass as white a luxury that she did not have? Psychoanalytic training. When I share my decision with my when I decide to apply for psychoanalytic training, I share my decision with my Latinx colleagues. They did not say this explicitly, but in so many words, they said, "Why are you doing this to yourself? That's not our community. We don't belong there." I immediately wanted to minimize their concerns and say to them, psychoanalysis is not that way, or at least that was my fantasy and denial. My graduate program in Boston was strong in psychoanalytic theory, and it was there that I became intrigued by the unconscious process and wanted to understand myself through others, through my new discovered lens. Sophie Freud Lowenstein, Freud's granddaughter, was my professor. I wanted a membership to the psychoanalytic community, and I hoped that this membership would validate and legitimize who I was. In reflecting, I was not aware that the challenges that would arise to trying to blend my culture and the psychoanalytic culture. Was I going to identify with being with my Mexican culture or the psychoanalytic white culture? Or was I going to be in a state of suspension and trying to connect with either? I started the psychoanalytic training. I was the only Latinx candidate in the class in the Institute. I did not see any people of color, not even the support staff. In the past, I usually found comfort in connecting with at least the support staff because of our ethnic similarities. I was in awe of the senior analysts in the Institute and half-heartedly believed that I could be like them when I grew up. There was something magical about the transformation process of becoming an analyst, and I felt a tad like Cinderella. The imposter syndrome was alive and well inside me, and feelings of inadequacy overshadowed my enthusiasm about being in the Institute. Whiteness was everywhere, upper class wealth dominated. I truly felt I did not belong here. I am a first generation college student, a first generation Mexican American from Los Angeles, the barrio, the east from Los Angeles, the barrio of Los Angeles. I am the first person in my family to attend college. The Institute hosted social gatherings in the members' and candidates' homes. I noticed that these gatherings lacked Latinx and became keenly aware of the upper class environment. Their high socioeconomic status, they expressed through their clothing, the places they vacationed, and their affluent homes. At the social and holiday gatherings held at the members' homes, I noticed that the help was of Latin descent. I would love to have a conversation in Spanish with them, but I do not. I'm aware that by not doing so, I am I'm clutched and held by my self-consciousness. In class, I try not to speak too much and stay under the radar to hide my self-doubt and insecurities. I feel anxious and aware of the tokenization that has been part of my professional and educational development. Did I earn my admissions as a result of my accolades or my ethnicity? Was I here to meet the Institute's diversity quota? I questioned myself and at times experienced feelings of inferiority. I am haunted by the experience of tokenization, and I'm deeply aware that if I fail, my failure is a reformation of my inferiority and my people, and yet should I succeed, my success is a reaffirmation of superior culture and white supremacy. This vulnerability manifests in anxiety, anger, irritation, paranoia, distrust of others. It is managed with some combination of manic defense and summarization. To succeed in this space, aspects of myself and my identity have been sacrificed and forced to split off parts of myself. And in order to avoid triggering white discomfort. Developing a deeper understanding of the psychoanalytic process was intriguing, stimulating, and frightening. What would I discover about myself that I did not want to know or did not know or didn't want to know? If I choose to apply for psychoanalytic training, what would I find out about myself? When I began at the Institute of Contemporary Psychoanalysis, it had a contagious energy, attracted people in droves. My class was only the 4th class in the Institute history. We were all anxious and eager, and the feeling of the Institute was electrifying. As opposed to my peers, my transformation was painstaking because of my ethnicity presented an added dimension of fitting in. I felt like an imposter in fear that my colleagues would soon discover that I did not belong. I remember telling my analyst that I wish that I was a cashier at Target instead. However, I did not think she understood what I meant by this comment because my ethnicity was not fully explored in my analysis. In my mind, working at Target could be seen as a natural progression from someone from my community, therefore it would not be such a reach. And what would I be doing and being expected to be what I would be doing would be working what was expected of my ethnic group versus being in a white scholarly community. I questioned my unconscious motivation to pursue psychoanalytic training. While my analysts, my supervisors, and my classmates were all different, these differences were not addressed. Was this because psychoanalysis transcends racial differences? Would my culture be pathologized for not assimilating to the upper white middle class values as I had experienced professionally in the past? I had a need for my analysts, for my supervisors, for my classmates to see all parts of me, yet I felt invisible. I was confused. Was it my ethnicity that was not accepted or seen? And how do I separate the two? After being told that I was too quiet in class, a microaggression against my ethnicity, I become my psychoanalyst of my own behavior and unconscious mind. How do I navigate my cultural values versus what is expected from me at the Institute? I know I was quiet, but it was taking all of my internal resources to be here. Was the whiteness around me adding to my quietness? I remember one of my classmates saying that I was more of a Jap, Jewish American princess than she was. I had heard this term before, but never towards me. Did she mean that I was able to pass as white because of my skin color and designer bag? Or did I consciously remove myself from my culture? I started fantasizing about being part of the Mexican community. Again, since Mexico City has a robust psychoanalytic presence, could I conduct analysis in Spanish? I had a nostalgic procedural memory of my early years in Mexico City with my parents. My parents could provide a well-off life for myself and my older brother in Mexico City, but made a mindful decision to have my brother and I born in Brownsville, Texas, for the sake of United States citizenship. There was never an intention for my brother and I to grow up in the United States. So we returned to Mexico to resume our lives. I wonder now if my origin birth adds to my feeling, to my not feeling entitled as a US citizen, since I was really in Mexico and my parents had decided that I would be born in the US. I was aware of the painful marginalization of the undocumented Latinx. I fortunately did not experience that due to my birth status. Undocumented lands are constantly negatively worded due to in the political limelight, yet they represent and are instrumental in the underground economy. When I recently see a little girl crying for her father after Immigration Custom Enforcement, ICE, raids the factory he worked at, I start to cry for both of us. I see myself in the little girl since my mother was also an undocumented worker in a factory. When I was 5 years old, I remember crossing the border with my mother. We were both detained by ICE, or La Migra, as I know it in my community. I was terrified that my mother would not be allowed to return to the United States. For the next few years, I lived in fear that my mother would be deported. When I went to school, I feared that she would not be home when I returned home. When I returned, it was difficult to concentrate on learning the alphabet in kindergarten when a significant part of my attention was spent worrying about my mom. If La Migra came knocking on her door, and I wasn't there not to translate, how would she communicate? My childhood was plagued with separation anxiety and responsibility of taking care of my mother, a common role served by first generation children. Literature review. I discovered that there was no literature review on the psychoanalytic Latinx analyst and the white patient, even scarcer on the Mexican American analyst. That was surprising to me since Mexican Americans are the largest group residing in the United States. Okay, clinical vignette, the interview. Now I'm going to talk about the patient that I base a lot of my work and the dissertation on. David begins a telephone interview with me. Upon introducing himself, he continues to interview me as a potential therapist. I maintain a sense of calmness as I speak to him. I'm overly subconscious of my accent, and I start to feel like I'm being tested and scrutinized. As he probes about my training experience, I sense he's taking notes as I speak. Family history. David is a 35-year-old white male referred to me due to marital issues. He has been married for 10 years and he and his wife have a 2-year-old daughter. David is originally from the East Coast, was raised by both his parents, and is the oldest of 2 children. He describes his childhood as good, and it has a sporadic relationship with his younger sister, who is married and has a child and is a social worker. As a young child, he excelled academically and was deeply involved in sports, played musical instruments, and attended a prestigious boarding high school, and afterwards an Ivy League college. First session. David enters a consultation room and starts to share with me his marital issues. He indicates he has a successful career in finance, and it becomes clear to me that he belongs to the top 1% of wealth. He describes his family history and tells me about his family lineage that is traced back to early colonization, blue blood. David is from New England, from the New England area, and describes his family background as white Anglo-Saxon. I have a procedural experience of white Anglo-Saxon, what meant based when I lived in Boston. They held themselves as superior people and looked down on others who they think less than they are, who are less than they are, and became familiar with the concept rugged individualism, which appears to convey their values and position in relationship to others. When David is in my office, his presence feels large. I'm aware of the physical and emotional energy, and I'm wondering if there's enough space for both of us in my office. But David is engaging and interesting, and I'm immediately drawn to his story. I'm further reminded of our racial and class differences. I ask myself if he will continue to see me. I'm aware of the power differential in the room: class, culture, gender. Do I want to see him? Are we a good analytic fit? Do I feel inferior by who David is? And what he represents, white privilege. I wonder what it's like for him to see a first-generation Mexican American analyst. I wonder if my ethnicity is obvious to him. When he writes his first check for payment, he asks, "What kind of name is Mucino? Is it Italian?" Oh, I think to myself, here it goes. My ethnicity is usually known in the room, but due to the color of my skin, it's often not discussed. Disclosing my ethnic background to David feels familiar since he's not my first white patient, but yet it feels uncomfortable due to the politicization of Mexicans in the recent years. I am walking towards my bookcase to get a book to share with him. A familiar feeling of being discovered as an imposter comes over me, and I think for a quick second, do I misrepresent myself and say that I'm Italian, or do I try to pass for Italian, as others have assumed about me before? Would passing as European American versus Latinx elevate my status in his eyes, or do I confess my true heritage as Mexican American? What experience does he have with Mexicans? His daughter's nanny, the housekeeper, the gardener? Will he group me with them? I sheepishly make eye contact and say, "My name is Mexican." He simply responds with "oh," and nothing else nothing else is said. I look at him intensely to see if he's going to add something more, but only silence follows. I start to free associate what the possible meaning of "oh" carries. Does he have a negative or positive feeling about seeing a Mexican therapist? Why is he curious about my last name? Would he prefer that I be white and Italian? The question itself feels aggressive, possibly a micro insult. How do I maintain a knowing position in the process of mutual knowing and state of sharing when I'm the other? A memory floods my mind when my daughter was a toddler, and I was at a Westside Santa Monica Park, and one of the other mothers asked if I was my daughter's nanny. My daughter has a lighter complexion than I do, and her features are not as ethnic as mine. My husband is Mexican American, third generation, and has a lighter complexion. This question saddens me and penetrates through my soul as I look at my daughter. When David at times is late paying his statement, I recognize the clinical implications of not wanting to pay. Our professional relationship is evolving into a meaningful and intimate exchange in which he's able to address his unmet longings from childhood to the present. Paying for therapy would add insult to injury, giving the relationship a transactional aspect. At times I wonder if I'm uneasy asking him to pay because of the Latin culture's norms. I know not to talk about money. How much is it due to my clinical implications or my influence by my own culture? Do I believe that I do not deserve his payment because of how my ethnicity is viewed by the dominant white culture? As when I observe the transactional aspect of our relationship, I feel like an ATM. He withdraws without a sense of mutuality. For instance, he's inconsistent with payments and is unable to acknowledge the importance of our relationship. I wonder if David and my intersubjective worlds are colliding in regards to how each of us experiences culture, values, relationships, and money. Okay. And it's not accepting and how and we're not accepting each other without knowing it. After being told that I'm too quiet, in class, a microaggression against my ethnicity, I become a psychoanalysis. I'm sorry. Sorry, I went to the other section. Let me see. Okay. During the first phase of the analytic work with David, he focuses on the great detail in his wife's psychology. He appears to put effort in trying to decipher his wife's feelings. He idolizes his wife and describes her as a perfect mom. David and his wife started dating when they were in high school, marrying after college. His wife had recently revealed that had traveled out of town for a business trip, and following her return, David described her as being distant, different. She told David shortly after the return that she was not happy in their marriage, and continued by telling him that she was not emotionally fulfilled in their relationship and that she could not be the best version of herself with him. His wife then disclosed that she had been having an affair with a co-worker, with an affair with a work colleague. His response was to work harder at saving his marriage. After this revelation, our relationship deepened. He began to see me as an expert and was attentive and highly focused during our sessions. He hung on my every word and used me as a teacher to better understand his wife. And the treatment, therefore, I often felt like a teacher. And in this status, an indicator of his attachment was developing towards me. He maintains intense and at times piercing eye contact. He scrutinizes my every gesture and questions my nonverbal behavior. Why did you look away? What are you thinking? We have multiple sessions per week, often double sessions, emails and texts exchange between in-person sessions. As part of the enactment of the disparity of status between us, his feelings of being superior and my feelings of being diminished, David makes several condescending and patronizing microaggressions, probably using those comments and microaggressions as a way of creating a distance between us. I wonder how much my own ethnicity and David's painful conflictual affects intersect. He quizzes me on East Coast geography, literature, current events to determine how versed I am and my intellectual ability. He also comments on how I dress and asks why I do not have more of a variation in my wardrobe and color scheme. I often wear black pants. He subtly noticed that I do not have enough wealth to have a diverse wardrobe. I remember feeling inferior. Nevertheless, I see David's comments as an attempt to even the playing field in our relationship, and his racial enactments are a form of devaluation. I run into David by the elevator after one of our sessions. He mentions to me that he's going to purchase a car for his nanny to drive his daughters to activities. At this point, he and his wife have 3 daughters, 3 children. I asked him what kind of car they're planning to get, and he says that they're going to get a Honda CR-V, the same car I have. This exchange reminds me of our differences, socioeconomic class backgrounds, since my family used public transportation when I was a child to get from one activity to the next. Specific moments of meeting. During one of our sessions, David shares with me that he has made special plans he had made special plans for the previous night for he and his wife to celebrate her reaching an important work milestone. As they are leaving, she's leaving for work though, she informs David that she's not going to be able to come home for their celebration because she was going to go out with her work colleagues instead. She comes home at 2 a.m. As David is telling me the details, I can see he's obviously disappointed with his wife's change of plans. He looks at me to help him understand and make sense of the change and notices a subtle change in my facial expressions. I mostly focus on his feelings of disappointment, which he's able to acknowledge. He leaves the office and calls me an hour later to inform me that when he arrives home, he confronted his wife about the previous night. He asked if she had been with the same co-worker that she had had an affair with, and she says yes. David tells me that after our session, he could not get over the look in my eyes as he told me the story, and that he thought that there was more to the story, more to his wife's story than she had shared. My nonverbal reaction to the story gave him the impetus to confront his wife. Otherwise, he would not have been able to do so, he tells me on the phone call. This prompted a shift in David's ability to trust me through my nonverbal cues, allowing him to confront his wife and unveil the marital issues looming in his relationship. This interchange, a now moment, represents a different intersubject context between us that leads to expanding our shared consciousness, a shared and individual consciousness. The divorce. David's wife asked him for a divorce 4 years into the analysis. He is angry at me because he thinks that all along I knew his marriage was doomed to fail and that I kept this from him. He is frustrated that not only would he lose his family, but would also face significant financial loss since he had acquired more wealth since he began treatment, making the divorce more financially costly. David's world and family, as he knew, was falling apart. He describes getting into a fetal position at his home office and crying because the deep loss evoked by the divorce. His organizing principle is that he's losing at life and is undeserving of happiness, and left him feeling fragmented with a depleted sense of self. I let him know that I understand his pain and that I will be there for him and that together we'll get through this. I understand that trusting me will be hard since I was not able to protect him from getting hurt. And then I should have been able to know that the outcome of his marriage. After all, the reason he sought therapy was to save his marriage, and his efforts were unsuccessful. Shortly after the divorce process begins, he shares with me that when he was in high school, he had applied to a musical conservator school and an Ivy League college. He was accepted to both and was leaning towards attending the conservative school, and his father wrote him a letter recommending that he choose the Ivy League college, which he did. David described his feelings that he chose the Ivy League college not to risk disappointing his father. And I asked him if he thinks that I also put my own agenda like his father did. when he was making the decision to go to college. He hesitated for a minute and said, yeah, maybe. As he continues to explore the meaning of his feelings, I suggest that his concerns for the emotional well-being of others are often at his own emotional expense. And I wonder if his sense of vitality has been fraught with requirements to take care of others in his life in order to maintain a relationship with them. His affect state changes from anger to sadness. I feel the weight of David's divorce and ensuing emotions during this period. After a session, I dream that I'm back in graduate school, earning my degree again. I am confused at this dream as to why I returned to school when I already have my degree. It doesn't make sense. I only surmise that my dream is my organizing principle surfacing that I should somehow have known about David's marriage ending in divorce. Therefore, I should go back to graduate school, having missed something so important in the aspect of the treatment. After this dream, I reflect on my own personal process and wonder if I truly had an unconscious motivation for David to stay in his marriage. And I also wonder if my ethnicity and values towards keeping the family together and avoiding divorce caused me not to recognize the possibility of David's marriage ending. Perhaps I was trying to protect him from going through the divorce and emotional turmoil of divorce, and did not want to acknowledge, and he did not want to acknowledge the disjunction in his marriage as well. At times, I did think about his young children and the effect divorce would have on them. Our exchange on how to fix this marriage often led us to discussions on parenting issues. And through this, he began to realize that his wife was not a perfect mom after all. When David first entered treatment, I could see that his psychological system was one of rigid organizing principles. He internalized an unconscious requirement to please others at his own emotional expense, a pathological accommodation. It seemed that for him, accommodation was the only way to survive and to maintain relationships with his parents, and unfortunately continue using this template with others, including his wife. Our relationship continued, though it was turbulence at times. He withdrew and did not come to therapy for several days in a row. He would rather be at a home alone. He discussed this more, and he was able to admit that that we could understand David's feelings of shame connected to the failed marriage. And based on this, his organizing principle tells me that he's a loser. David would often feel discouraged by the lack of progress he was making in therapy. He mostly measured his progress by financial success and keeping his wife happy, external markers. When I tried to redirect him to look more internally and address his feelings or affect states, he appeared confused and reluctant, but reluctantly agreed. He seems to trust me and experiences. It seems to trust me at times, and it appears that his divorce and his relationship with his wife created a adult onset of trauma for him. The trauma produced feelings of shame and disorganizing anxiety, which led to self-isolation and withdrawal from therapy for short periods of time. David finds a place, and David was able to find a place to process his feelings and traumas stemming from his marriage and over time feelings of from his childhood. Within the safety of our relationship, was able to share and process painful past experiences. As we continue to make sense of his current feeling states, he shares more feelings of inadequacy that he had as long as he could remember. Looking back at his childhood, he is confused because he sees his parents as good people, but describes his relationship, because that the relationship was missing an emotional connection and warmth. He describes his mother as reserved and distant and critical of his father. His father was more available, but seemed to hold back, perhaps not to accept his critical mother. When he was in fourth grade, he remembers that his parents talking to him after they had gone to meet with his teacher. They congratulated him congratulated him, his teacher having noted that he was gifted and had a high IQ and therefore should be successful in life. They focused on his achievement and what he could become, then on him and what he was feeling, and on his feelings. Narrative. David's narrative was that even though he had achieved financial and professional success, he would refer himself as a loser due to feelings of self-contempt and a sense of that happiness eluded him. For instance, when he had achieved certain financial goals, he set for himself markers of success and happiness. Still, happiness was not existence. David's narrative upon entering treatment was one of inadequacy. He believed that if he worked harder, he could make his wife happy and by proxy fix his marriage. He saw his problems as having to do with not understanding his wife, nor did he have the ability to figure out what his wife wanted from him. He had a deep feeling of inadequacy that stemmed from his childhood and continued with his wife. My narrative of David. My understanding of David's narrative was that he developed a false sense of self based on his material achievements and pathological accommodation. There had been a lack of effective attunement dating back to his childhood that continued with his wife. The formulas he used to succeed academically and professionally did not transfer over to relationships. David found himself at a loss in navigating relationships. These feelings of loss confirmed and further perpetuated the perception of being a loser. The idea of being a loser goes back to a primary state of relating in childhood, and it was safer for him to see himself as a loser rather than recognizing the lack of emotional connection with his parents. He was confronted with the reality that he needed to be present emotionally with his wife, and when his wife stated that she wasn't fulfilled emotionally, but he lacked the ability to do so. He did not know what to do and was overwhelmed by the intensity of his affect states. Co-constructed narrative. We created a narrative by making the unconscious conscious. Through empathic attunement, as he recalled childhood memories that illustrated the lack of parents' emotional capacity. This set an emotional template for his present and future connection with others, including the connection with his wife. His new narrative, co-created an analysis, included a more authentic sense of self, from loser to more competent, and how he navigated his own emotional world, as well as relationships with others. He was now able to identify and make meaning of his feelings in a positive way that was new for him, and he saw himself differently and increased his ability to acknowledge his feelings through this process. He was able to develop a more substantial sense of self and was hopeful about his future and ability to find and hold on to feelings, but with his new narrative discussion. Let's see. Okay. In retrospect, I look back on my relationship with David and I wonder if I look back and I would say that my work with David was very rewarding. Our class and racial differences were part of our mutual analytic space, and there was a transformation that occurred in the treatment. According to psychoanalytic literature, racial differences can interfere and impede the treatment. However, with this patient, the differences actually facilitated the treatment process. The fact that we were from different culture actually fostered a therapeutic relationship. He was able to perceive me. He was able to perceive me as he had perceived his daughter's nanny, and transfer his positive feelings he had towards me from her. In our relationship, he shared that he liked the nanny's warm and nurturing style, and that she was like a family member. His relationship with his daughter's nanny smoothed the pathway towards creating a sense of safety in our relationship. With me as his analyst, he felt less threatened and could be more vulnerable. He was able to avoid a sense of humiliation, competition he might have experienced with a white therapist. In my relationship with David, I became aware of the importance of being authentic and present. He would often come in and question and concerns on all aspects of his life: financial, parenting, dating, career. He would tell me that he would never be happy again after his divorce. This statement speaks to the deep sense of betrayal and disillusionment and how disillusioned he felt from his wife, who gave so much to. David began a relationship with his divorce attorney following his divorce. He was excited about this new relationship and described her as psychologically minded, warm, and that she happened to be half Mexican. He connected her to me by mentioning that she wore a lot of Black attire. I smiled and nodded. After a few years of dating, they were married. There were several aspects of this treatment that I found revealing of my own unconscious process. When David made condescending, patronizing, microaggressive comments towards me, I would understand that this was his way of self-protection against me, aspects of my personality may have been found initially threatening. It seemed to me that our racial and class differences were more in the room than I had experienced in the past with other patients. I felt that I needed to be in the room and that I could not hide parts of myself like my ethnicity, as I had done with other patients in the past. I wondered if our relationship helped him overcome barriers that he might experience with me as the other, which allowed him to be more intimate in this new relationship. He was emotionally more available in his new relationship in a way that he had not been with his previous wife. His relationship with his first wife created intense feelings of deprivation that resulted in this intense presence. The intensity required a level of intimacy and closeness from him that at times in our relationship, which was hard for me to maintain. But I could see that it was important for him because it helped him with his ability to develop authenticity. It felt like a reenactment of both our intersubjectivities. It was as we both engaged in a mutual dance, showing ourselves and recognizing the others in service of our relationship. In the process of writing this paper, I became aware that I did not address the racial differences in the treatment. There was a series of racial enactments that revealed themselves in David and my unconscious process. The most notable was the racial enactments that we both silently agreed not to address the racial differences between us. To contextualize the treatment of this patient, a multi-layered treatment unfolded. My culture milieu was the surrounding of whiteness hindered my ease to express my Mexican identity. I wish I had addressed my identity, my ethnicity with my analyst and during my training at the Institute. I consciously followed his lead in suppression. I longed for a whole environment in which I could process and safely discuss my ethnicity in relationship to becoming an analyst. The treatment turned out well because of several factors. My patient had developed a positive nanny transference. My ethnicity was different than his parents and his wife, who were emotionally constricted and distant. David needed someone to believe in him and saw the goodness inside him. I provided a holding environment in which he could experience and internalize a different sense of self. My cultural values influenced my clinical stance in the treatment and facilitated a positive outcome. His own positive outcome, among others, included developing his ability to establish and maintain positive relationships, increasing and recognizing his emotional needs, no longer subjugating his needs in order to accommodate and to actually, and to be more authentic in his relationships, to be more authentic self in his relationships. Conclusion. This paper was about the intersubjective conjunction between ethnicity and separate separate individuals that extend into intersubjective experience. There is limited research on the impact of the analyst ethnicity on treatment. I hope that that my paper can add something to this in the field of ethnicity and the impact that it has in the analytic relationship. I found the racial and ethnic differences between the therapist and the patient were very powerful aspect of this case and my own development. I felt alienated and unconsciously I did not address the cultural differences between myself and my patient due to my own and his white discomfort. The literature often describes the racial differences between a white analyst and a patient of color as a disjunction impediment of treatment. In my case, race was reversed with a person of color analyst and a white patient. I found that the racial differences actually facilitated treatment, even though in the beginning I did not fully address the differences due to my countertransference and the whiteness surrounding me. In this case, the treatment process illustrated how intersubjectivity results in a positive treatment outcome. Our racial differences was the elephant in the room. And if I had addressed the otherness, this would have unfolded a deeper understanding of the meaning of our racial differences. I came to the conclusion that the psychoanalytic community needs to be more intentional about making themselves more available and inclusive in training as well as in practice. It would behoove us to embrace cultural differences like family dynamics as a possible strength and internal resource rather than pathologizing them. Thank you. I don't know what my slide is.
Thank you, Gloria. You can stop sharing now.
Okay.
Gloria, thank you. Now we'd like to open the floor up to questions. So you may either place your questions in the chat and Sabina will read them, or you can just unmute yourself and ask your question yourself.
I guess I have a question. First of all, thank you for that very thoughtful presentation. I enjoyed it a lot. I'm sort of a relatively new academic dean here at ICSW, but given your experience and so forth, in terms of embracing cultural differences and how that plays out in psychodynamic work in an educational institute like ours, what kind of recommendations would you have?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think it's seeing people who look like you there, you know, having that acceptance, talking about it, giving people permission, not making assumptions, you know, just making it. I mean, I felt, like I said in the paper, that it was such a huge leap for me. And one of the things that's interesting for me is that I graduated, I did my 4-year academic work at the Institute. I did my 3 control cases. I did my own analysis and I was done in 97 and I did not get my dissertation and my degree until 2020 because I did not feel that there was room on the table for someone like me.
Wow.
That's a powerful statement, and I appreciate your making that. And I think that hoping that we are all enriched by the presentation and really think about that and the notion of imposter. When I was in my doctoral program, I too felt like an imposter, but I think that there were people like me and there was a history, kinds of things that made me feel better or feel more welcomed. So I think some of the things you're identifying really are important for us to listen to and reflect upon.
Yeah, because I really didn't have any intention of completing my degree. I just thought, oh, I don't really need it. I really talked myself out of it. And I don't really need it. I learned what I had to learn from the Institute, which is true. I felt like the Institute really changed me clinically and who I am as a therapist. And I will always be very appreciative and grateful because I think it just, it was transformational for me.
Right.
And so but I didn't feel like I needed it. My daughter is in college, in her first year in college. She took a psychology course and her professor told her, oh, in psychology, you can either get a PhD or a PsyD. And people would ask me when I was out with my daughters, they would ask me, oh, you're going to finish or you're going to get your degree? And I'd say, oh, well, if I wrote my paper or my dissertation, if I finished the dissertation, I would get my PsyD. So my daughter comes back and says to me after her break, and when she's in college, she goes, Mom, if you finish that paper, you would get a PsyD, right? And I said, oh yeah. I never even thought she had really ever even put that together, and it made me think, oh yeah, I would. And she kind of called me out on that. And I thought, yeah, well, why am I not doing this?
And then on a personal note, I started my career at Boston University Social Work School, and we had a lot of good relationships over at Simmons, and Sophie Freud-Levenstein was wonderful.
Yeah, wasn't she? She was lovely.
Yes.
Lovely. I was so excited to have her as a professor.
Yeah, most people do.
Yeah, she was nothing like what I would expect her to be.
Well, she wrote that wonderful paper about, differences from her grandfather and herself.
Yeah.
That had a lot of currency and really moved the whole Boston psychodynamic community forward, right? So, thank you.
Thank you, Andy. I think, Joe, do you have your hand raised?
Yes, I do. Well, I want to make a couple of comments. I can't remember when Gloria contacted me asking me to be the mentor for that paper. And I quickly agreed because I had known Gloria for many years and, I felt privileged to help her with that. Now, two things stand out, which Gloria, I think, did not emphasize sufficiently, which is during her years at ICP and in her analysis, the issues of ethnicity never came up. And it was only as we worked together that she became sort of more interested in pursuing that, and that resulted in the paper. So my thought is, as much as the focus on diversity is among us, I think as educators in some institutions that is not sufficiently, brought up and discussed. I think the transformation that has occurred in the past couple of years at ICSW is precisely one of.
Oh, we lost Joe.
No, he's still here. We still hear you, Joe.
Oh, okay.
I think Gloria is frozen, but we can still hear you, Joe. Hopefully she'll come back soon.
Okay. In any case, the responsibility of us as educators of bringing that to the forefront rather than expecting the students themselves to raise the issues of otherness, I think is one that I have taken from working with Gloria, that things can go by the board, can be sort of normalized and insufficiently attended if we as the adults, so to speak, don't take responsibility for bringing those issues to the forefront.
Joe, I agree with you 100%. And Gloria, I appreciate your honesty and vulnerability in the paper as you spoke about what your experience was, because I think at ICSW, as Andy was saying, and Joe is definitely underscoring, is that do we lean into our students and help them talk about something, or do we wait till they bring it up to us? Like a parallel in the therapeutic situation. As therapists, do we wait till someone brings something up, or do we speak of it? Because even you spoke of it in the paper that you were waiting. You were waiting. Well, how did you come to realize that you didn't have to wait?
Yeah. But I mean, I was waiting, I was waiting for the patient to say something. That's right.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another point I want to highlight about the case, which is the contribution that Gloria's paper makes in understanding what she came to call the nanny transference. The patient perceived her as he had experienced his daughter's nanny. The ethnicity issues sort of tied up in that are really very significant. It's like, if she hadn't been of the ethnicity that she was, would the transference have developed differently? And I think this man latched on to something familiar that he appreciated, felt comfortable with, and in fact, found helpful. And the transference was able to evolve in that way. Of course, Gloria played her part in bringing that to the forefront and to the benefit of the patient. So we have added now to the list of transferences, the nanny transference.
Nanny transfers, yes, definitely. I have a question for you, Gloria, and there may be additional questions as well. I'm wondering if you still feel that you are unconsciously choosing the psychoanalytic community over your ethnic culture. Do you still feel like you have to do that now?
Well, one of the things that I have always done in my career is that I've always worked in the community as well as my practice. So in a way, I feel like I've always, not secretly, but I've always kept my foot in the community and working with the underserved, working with more people of color, and I feel like in that way I haven't, but there's been two dimensions, but I don't feel, I think, I don't know if I'm, when it's so interesting in therapy, in analysis, and when you're seeing patients, it's not about you and it is about the transference. So sometimes I feel like I'm not bringing it up as much unless it comes in the room with the patient, because that's how I was trained. But I do feel like I have the other part where I work in the community and I'm able to kind of get that part, because I feel like there's a need for me to be connected in a way and to be real in a way that I can be in the office with my patients. I mean, I'm real with them, but it's not about me in that way. I'm a tool, more or less, And so did I answer your question?
Yes, I think, you talk, one of the things I was struggling with is not just, in your current role, but then also as a student in the classroom, although I did ask you about your current role, how do we bring our authentic selves into any space? And I think that's important, especially when you find yourself in situations where you are in the racial or ethnic minority, that you don't want people to think you are hiding a part of your identity. Although I understand that at different times, your salient identity may have to be your profession. And then at other times, your salient identity may be your ethnicity.
Exactly.
Elrie, did you have a question? I'm sorry, Elrie, did you have a question? I thought I heard you while I was.
I want to ask if you think that the transference from your patient to the nanny and then to his current wife, who is half Mexican as well, do you think that he transferred again his comfort to that to his new wife?
Definitely.
Say some more.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Wow. So do you think that's authentic? That, well, you said they dated for over a year before they remarried.
Yeah, a couple of years and they remarried. Yeah, and I think you would have, his parents, very traditional East Coast, they did not like his new wife. Surprise, right? They did not like,
Wow.
I mean, and she's, she looks blonde. She has blonde, she dyes her hair blonde. She's very light complected, but they didn't like her because, they just, and, to me, it was very interesting that he said she's half Mexican, but never said anything about me in relationship to me, ever.
Interesting.
Additional questions or comments? Anne, Pat, Ramona, Mike, Andrea, Sabina. I'm trying to get to people who haven't had an opportunity to speak yet, if you'd like to speak.
No, I just wanted to thank you, Gloria. And I did have the similar question of what kept you going. And I think it was your daughter, in terms of, really kind of pushing you through to model that for her and to complete it. So wonderful work and congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Pat, go on.
Yes, but where'd she go?
She moved a little bit. I think someone may have dropped off. So she is in a different location, but she's still here.
There you go, Gloria. I was going to say, Gloria, I'm curious as who did you share your concerns with? Did you go to a supervisor or a consultant, or did you do this internal work yourself as you were working with David?
Yeah, I did, have some supervision, but again, my supervisors never addressed the cultural issues at all. And it was invisible. But I do remember when I was working with David that I just had to stay really present with him and authentic and be myself and really hold him in a way that he hadn't been held before. Yeah. And that would make the difference in the treatment. And I was, and that was my driving, and I remember thinking almost like because of my infant mental health training and with young children, I felt like he just needs to be held because he hasn't had that. And I need to hold him in this way. And I'll do whatever I can to convey that with really good boundaries, with appropriateness. I mean, even though we had this relationship and it was very, very intense, the boundaries it was my responsibility to keep the boundaries very clear. Nothing ever, he never gave me any. Sometimes he would say, oh, I have tickets. I can get tickets for the Lakers for you. I can do this. Never did anything. Never gave, I think he ordered one book from Amazon and didn't like it. He goes, here, I ordered this book if you want it. But that was, I don't want the book if you want it. And that was the only gift or acknowledgement in all the years I saw him.
I think your training in infant mental health really opened up the yearnings or longings of his emotional deprivation.
Mhm.
And you know, when you were talking about, and Joe was talking, and someone else was talking about the nanny transference, I was thinking, when a parent who has deprivations actually sees a child being attended to emotionally, I think it's, as you know, the ghost in the nurseries kind of that those feelings arise and they don't know what, the adults don't know what to do with them. Like,
Right. That's what it felt like to me with him. Yeah. So I just had to really just kind of go and hold him like that and then just talk to him. And, you know, just really, and not even talk, because there was the nonverbal, that connection that when he saw in my face when he was telling me about his wife and that she came home at 2 o'clock in the morning. And that, to me, when that happened, I was so, I felt the connection that we had, and I wasn't even aware that I was giving that nonverbal, you know, I felt for him. I thought, this doesn't feel right. There's more to the story, but I didn't want to give that to him. You know, I didn't want it, you know, I felt like he needed to see that himself. And so I just was like, oh, this, you know, and when he said that to me, when he called me, I was like, oh my goodness, the power of the relationship.
yeah. That's why we do this work. Wow.
Additional questions, comments?
His wife was so disrespectful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I enjoyed your presentation, Gloria.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you.
And I would like to say, just Gloria, your presentation and the way you unfolded it, you know, I'm sitting here as a therapist associating to all the other individuals I work with. So it is not you, and I don't even know, I know Joe said he worked with you and he helped sort of navigate the space, but I feel like there's some unfinished business that I have responded to in your presentation that I think now I have to go off and think about it myself.
Okay. Okay.
I would suggest that you read the paper. I think a lot, you know, may have sort of gone under the radar when you listen to a paper like this, as complex as it is. You may not appreciate the fullness and the richness of what's in it. I really, if you carefully read that paper, I think you will get another dimension of.
Where can we access the paper?
I think Michelle can arrange for that.
Yes, Gloria, if you would, I don't know, Gloria, if it's okay to share the paper with the participants. Okay. If
I will do so.
Thank you, Ellery.
Thank you.
I think, Gloria, what I'm really struck by and probably leaving here with as the president at the Institute for Clinical Social Work is how we appreciate and continue to respect differences in the classroom. And one of the things that I said, it was actually my first presentation to the faculty. I talked about the increasing diversity in this country, particularly from the Hispanic population, and how it is our jobs to prepare ourselves for the students, not their jobs to prepare themselves for us. And I think we are advancing in that area. There's still more work to be done. So I was struck by your discussions of microaggressions that you felt within the classroom, and then also at social events as well. And I think it's something that we have to continue to think about, because although students won't always feel comfortable bringing them up, it is our job as administrators and faculty members to make certain that we are providing the most comfortable learning environment for all of our students. So thank you for being vulnerable enough to share that with us.
You're welcome. Well, I know that when Joe and I started working on the paper, Joe, you can add, to this is that I was really good. My intent was just to do the paper and be done and not really share this, like Joe said earlier. I wanted just to get it done, and I wasn't going to talk about my experience. And I couldn't find, I struggled to find my voice. And I think because it had been so cut off, that I had just had to for so long do that, that I wasn't able to find my voice. So, and I think Joe and I really we kept working on this to really get to this place where the paper ended up being the way it was, because that was my voice, but that's not what I wanted to do. Because I wanted to be the same as I always was, just keep going, go along to get along.
Yeah, one of the challenges I felt was to keep cheering and encouraging Gloria to pursue her voice. When she submitted the first draft of the paper, there was none of her in it. And then she sent me that bit about her experience in Boston. And I said, oh my God, that is what the paper is going to be about. And from there on, I think she took on the challenge. And it was a pleasure to see her grow and develop as a result. Thank you, Gloria, for your contribution.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Any final questions or comments?
I'm curious, how long did this whole process take of writing paper?
About a year and a half, thanks to the pandemic. It was also help, because it was like, okay, it's now or never. So,
Yes.
do it. So it took like a year and a half, right? But yeah, it was. Yeah, I at that point it was like, yeah, I have to do it now. It took, but like I said, it took 20 some years to really get to the place where I could even sit and write it. It wasn't going to do it. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your nice
Thank
comments.
you, Gloria. I have to give you our virtual applause, so thank you. It was a wonderful presentation. Thank you for agreeing to be with us this morning. And we will send the paper out to the participants. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a wonderful Friday afternoon and a wonderful weekend.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Charles, do you have a minute? Oh, I can't hear you.